all our lives, somehow. And we hope that the eulogy will bring some of that out.
Good evening. My father has given me one gift, which is the gift of gab. And so one thing that I'm going to try to do is keep this as brief as I can, I promise. First, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out and celebrating my father's life. I'm really moved by the amount of support that we've received as a family. And Facebook has been sort of an amazing way for us to get the word out and for people to send their support and their love, and that's been pretty amazing. Today I feel very much at peace. I know that my father has nothing to be ashamed of and everything to be very proud of. I feel so lucky to have had him in my life as long as I've had, and I know that a lot of people aren't as fortunate as I am, and so for that I'm very thankful. When I moved to California, or moved away from California, I should say, 15 years ago, I knew that I would be sacrificing the opportunity to be with my family whenever I wanted. Because of that, I've always had this fear that I wouldn't have the chance to get to know my dad on that next level. The transition where I'd have the chance to share a drink with him, share stories about work, ultimately become his friend and not just his son. 7 years ago, after my second daughter was born, I wrote my dad a letter. I sent the letter to him when he was healthy so that he would know how much he meant to me. More importantly, I did it because I didn't want the first time he heard all of this stuff from me to be at his eulogy. I'm telling you this because to me, my dad was my hero, and I wanted to make sure that he knew it before I lost the opportunity to tell him so. I'd like to share that letter I wrote with him. Dear Bobby, I'm writing this letter to you because I want to make sure you understand how much you mean to me. When I became a father, certain things became apparent that I never really thought of much when I was a kid. It made me appreciate you and Mommy even more. To begin with, thank you for always loving me. You've always been there for me no matter what time, place, or situation. You always put me and only you first, with no hesitation. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy work week to be at my practices and at my games. I knew other kids admired you for making those kinds of sacrifices and figured it's one of the reasons why they liked you so much. Thank you for being honest. I never knew you to do any wrong, whether in business or in life, and even if it ultimately cost you more grief in the end. Thank you for working so hard under the toughest circumstances and never complaining about it. Thank you for teaching me that the success of other people feels just as good as your own success when you're given a chance to be a part of it. Thank you for your personality. I definitely got mine from you. Thank you for your love of cooking. It's now my favorite hobby, which, by the way, is a means to the end because I also happen to like to eat. Thank you for being your strong beliefs in politics. I now have similar beliefs, yes, because of you. Thank you for teaching us the value of a good education. You really sacrificed a lot to me and Olivia through private school all those years. You never wavered, even when things got tough. There was never another option. Thank you for paying for my first 2 cars. Other kids had to worry about those things, not me. Thank you for knowing when to put your foot down. The times you did, you were always right. I know some of my friends secretly envied me because they wish they had someone like you during their challenging times. Thank you for the guidance on life and work. You taught me to make sure I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life and not to take any shortcuts to get there. Thank you for how much you love Mom. This year you would celebrate your 50-year wedding anniversary in a time when more than half the marriages in this world don't last. You serve as an inspiration to me and those around you. Thank you so much for the love that you give to Julia, Lauren, Emily, and Eric. At the time, my son Charlie hadn't been born yet. They are so lucky to have you as their abuelito. And finally, I love you very much. You are and always have been the best dad anyone could hope for. To me, my ultimate success would be having my kids feel the way I feel about you, to feel that way about me. Thank you, Dad. Now the long-winded part. I'd like to share some stories about my dad that you may or may not know, but they'll help kind of understand why he was who he was. My dad was Cuban, and if anybody in the room doesn't know that, then you haven't talked to my dad. He's kind of proud. When he was in Cuba, he and a few friends actually owned a lighting design and manufacturing company. One day, a government official came in and basically told my dad, guess what? Your company now belongs to the government. Naturally, this wasn't the kind of partnership my dad was looking for. The best part was, he was told that he had to stay on and help run the company. Because he originally owned the business with a few friends, and they were kind of young, whenever things were good, they would take all the profits out of the company and enjoy the money. When things were tough, they would take money out of their own bank accounts and put it back into the business so they could make payroll. The second week the government took ownership of this company, payroll was kind of tight. The government official asked my dad, what should he do? And my dad said, 2 weeks ago, that was my problem. Today, that's your problem. And I could just see his sarcastic smile on his face as he was actually planning to get out of that communist country. Attention to detail is another thing that comes to my mind. If you've ever seen my dad's writing or of his bookkeeping, you would think that a machine did it, not a human. That writing would later get him out of the shop and into the office. Dad was an accountant by trade. When he fled Cuba in early 1962, he promptly left Miami after only being there 3 days in hopes of differentiating himself in California. When he arrived in California, he took a job at Buffnell, which is a steel company, and he worked in the shop. He'd never worked in a shop before and never complained about it and worked very hard. One day the foreman noticed that everybody's time cards were kept perfectly, impeccably. He asked my dad if he's the one that had been doing it, and my dad said yes. And he said, "You've never worked in a shop, have you?" And my dad said no. Thank God for that guy, because he actually helped my dad get promoted into the office. Later, my dad would be the controller of that division of a company known as, or formerly known as, King Corporation. Fun-loving and inquisitive. My dad was always known to do funny things when we were growing up. When we were kids, he said that iron beer, which is a famous Cuban soft drink, was the best soft drink around. I thought he was being a little over-Cuban, actually. So one day, my dad decided to do a taste test. He went out and bought 20 different soft drinks and gave each one of them a unique number. He summons the kids in the neighborhood to come over to our house so that they could be the unbiased participants in this taste test. And they ended up casting a vote, and in the end, he was right. Iron beer won. Iron beer is basically Pepsi with more sugar, if you want to know what it is. Then there was the fried chicken test. We had to figure out who had the best fried chicken. Pioneer won that one. I recently tried doing the same thing, trying to be clever like my dad. Some friends in Chicago like to drink IPA beer, so I thought we would do an IPA beer taste test. My test quickly fell apart because we each sampled entire beers. After 3, we couldn't care less which one was better. Dad would have been disappointed because I didn't execute the plan. Gentle but firm. I was never a fan of school. For my kids, please don't listen to this part. In first grade, there was a day when I actually decided that I wouldn't go to school, and I've actually pried myself into the car, so much so that my mom couldn't get me out of the car. She went to the principal's office and called my father, who had to come from work to get me out of the car. He gave me a really light spanking and told me, the next one's going to be harder if you don't get out. Guess what? I went to school that day and every other day after that. That was the one and only time my dad ever spanked me. Somehow he just commanded respect, and when he was serious, he just listened. Proud dad of an athlete. I have some friends here that I used to play baseball with, so they'll appreciate the story. My dad was always into sports. The sports I played and the friends I made throughout my career. He really loved to watch us as we developed and got better and older. One of his favorite stories about me was when I was playing baseball. I played catcher like he did in Cuba. One game I was up to bat, and I hit a line drive. A gentleman standing next to my dad said, "Wow, I'd love to have that kid on my team. He just hit that ball like a grown man." My dad was so proud. A few innings later, same game, the other team had a runner on first base and he was going to steal. I threw the ball into center field. Turns out I don't have such a good arm. Another gentleman standing next to my dad said, "Man, that catcher's terrible." I'd be sending the runners all around the whole game. My dad was ready to crawl under a rock. You know now why I picked football. It took him years to figure that sport out. I promise I'm getting to the end. Spontaneity. In 2005, I had the chance to accompany my dad on a trip to see the home that his father was born in northern Spain. Keep in mind, this was the first time in 20 years that my father had been on an airplane. We arrived in Spain, and I was under the impression that the agenda was all set. Once we got to our hotel, he proceeds to call his cousin, who happens to be the only relative and the only person in Spain that could tell us how to get to his dad's house. And he notified her that we'd arrived. I asked my dad if she had anything planned for us, and he said, "I don't know, she just found out we got here." You mean to tell me we flew halfway across the world And she might have been on vacation, Dad. What are you thinking? He just smiled at me and said it'll be fine. And it turns out it was the trip of a lifetime. Same trip. I'm the klutzy son, by the way. On the way back from that terrific trip, we're on a small airplane and the flight attendant gives me an orange juice. I thought the lid was closed on the orange juice, so I proceed to shake the orange juice, and it proceeds to go over the business people that were sitting in front of me wearing white shirts. They had a bath of the citrus variety, I say. Well, you know you're still a little kid around your parents because that look that I got, I'll never forget. It's the same look I got when I was 9 years old. Never mattered. The best grandpa. When my daughter Julia was born, the world changed for my parents. She was the first of 5 grandchildren born. I remember making him hold her, and he acted as if he was holding the Holy Grail. He didn't know what to do. He'd later become a pro. He affectionately called Julia silly and Emily cuckoo. He would teach them how to make paper boats and blow up balloons and have a lot of fun with them. When my son Charlie was born, he would always comment on how much he would smile. The times we were coming home to visit, it was awesome to see him with my kids, Lauren and Eric, or my sister's kids. He lived for them. Perhaps one of my largest accomplishments was getting him set up on Skype. This coming from a man who said he would never email anyone, ever. Every Sunday we would Skype and we would have a lot of fun. It's really hard to sum my dad up in a few stories. He was a unique person that made him fun to be around most of the time. He had a presence very few people possessed. I'm proud of him and I will miss him terribly. One thing I ask each of you to remember is your favorite memory of my dad, and at some point maybe share it with me and my sister. I think we'd really appreciate that. I'd like to thank a few more folks before I get down here. The first is I'd like to thank the folks at Servite High School. The help and support that you've given my family has been pretty phenomenal, and we really appreciate it. I'd like to thank my wife, Cindy. Many of you don't know that I'm in the middle of relocating to Seattle, and so timing couldn't be better. She's been so giving and so supportive of me, and she acted out like my travel agent, making sure that I got home to see Dad as often as I could, even though she didn't know anybody in our new hometown. I'd like to thank my sister Olga. She's an amazing person. She demonstrated what it's like to be selfless over the past couple of months. She became my dad's guardian angel. Regina, that's my dad's sister. She's 83 years old, although you would never know it. And she came the next day my dad was hospitalized to make sure my mom was okay. If there was a saint on earth, she would be it. And Mom, you showed Dad so much love for 59 years. I love you and promise you that everything's going to be okay. Thank you.